This RealAg Radio podcast is brought to you by Brett Young. Change the game with BY7204LL, Brett Young's newest canola hybrid with Liberty Link technology.
It's time for RealAg Radio on Rural Radio Channel 147 on Sirius XM. RealAg Radio and RealAgriculture.com is your home for insight and analysis of the issues that are impacting your farm business. Let's get real and get connected with RealAg Radio.
Hello and welcome to RealAg Radio here on Rural Radio Channel 147, Sirius XM. I am your host for the day, Lyndsey Smith. It is Tuesday, October 1st, and that means it's time for Tuesdays with Lyndsey. It also means the beginning of spooky season, which is not my favorite. I am not a Halloween lover. However, I am a lover of pumpkin spice, of apple everything, of fall leaves, of cozy sweaters, of fireplaces, you name it. Autumn is the ticket. And yes, Canadian Thanksgiving coming up very soon. And this one I will agree with Sean Haney on, best holiday ever, mainly because of the food. Let's face it. And zero stress. You just get together, you have food, you celebrate the year that was, hug all your people in cozy sweaters, in front of fires, drinking hot beverages and eating pumpkin pie. What could be better? Okay, on today's show, we've got some pretty serious topics and very important ones as well. And so I'm glad I could put this show together. We are going to talk off the top with Brenna Grant. She's the executive director of Canfax, and she's going to bring the stats you want to know about the Canadian cow herd and just where we're at, and not just where we're at, but what signals we might get to show that the cow herd has stabilized, which we are starting to get some of those indications. Now, how long do we need to see that stabilization, and what is the likelihood, perhaps ever, of the Canadian cow herd growing? And yes, that is a real question. We likely will never get back to, this is my opinion, where we were at in that 4 million range. I really do feel that it's really more about stabilizing this cow herd. And perhaps, and I've got some questions for Brenna on this, looking at the dairy sector as a potential growing part of the beef sector. And I know that probably ruffles some feathers. So I'm always open to feedback. Do send it. And actually today's show, there's a lot going on that many of you will like to reach out, and please do. And actually at the end of today's show, I'm going to share some of the feedback that we've got on several of the stories that we've been covering here on RealAg Radio. Also on today's show, you're going to hear from Ryan Kehrig. He's with MMP. I finally got to track him down and ask the question from at least a tax perspective. We cannot answer all of these questions, but at least from a tax perspective, does it make more sense to build a new house at the farm or in town? We do talk a little bit about potentially moving it, adjacent to the farm, but there's actually some really key financial decisions that have to be made if a house is going to be built on the farm and part of the farm corporation. So Ryan's going to walk us through that because I think it's an incredibly important part. Yes, there are very emotional, very thoughtful, very important conversations to have about who is going to live in the house, where the exiting generation may go, where the incoming generation may go. All of those are important questions, but we do need to look at it also from the tax perspective as far as the farm is concerned. After that discussion, then I'm joined by Dr. Leigh Rosengren. She's the Chief Veterinary Officer for the Canadian Cattle Association. We need to talk about what is moving through Parliament right now. It's called Bill C-293. You may have heard of it already. It is in regards to preparing for a pandemic or a future pandemic. And there's language in it that, of course, refers to animal agriculture. This isn't a surprise, of course. Livestock are biological beings. We know that there are zoonotic diseases. We also know that we use antibiotics and anti-microbials in livestock production. So it's not surprising to see language in an act as broad sweeping as Bill 293. However, the language that's in it is incredibly problematic for a couple of reasons from the livestock sector's perspective. So I'm going to sit down with Dr. Rosengren and sort of talk about what the concerns are with the bill as written and how the industry, the cattle industry specifically, and more broadly the livestock industry, is dealing with this, is addressing the risk of antimicrobial resistance, because of course it is a large one, and it is one that the industry has been working on for quite some time. So stick around for that. And then, as I mentioned, we've got some time at the end of the show. We're going to tackle a few news pieces. We, of course, have a couple strikes we have to talk about. And I've got some feedback from listeners that I'd love to share with you. And if you feel so moved to do the same, you can, of course, as I said, email me, lsmith@realagriculture.com, or you can call that listener line 1-855-776-6147. Without further ado, let's hop to our first segment with Brenna Grant of Canfax.
Your co-op grow team are your local experts because we live here too. Our agronomic specialists stay up to date with the latest research and technology to help support your entire farm operation. Talk to our team for advice tailored to your farm's needs. We have recommendations to help you optimize your crop yield and quality while enhancing the health of your land. Co-op. We're all growing together. Here for your farm. Here for your family. Learn more at coop.crs/farm.
It's now time for a product spotlight with New Seed. Sean Walker, field sales manager for Montana. Tell us about the key benefits to the grower in North Dakota and Montana for the program this year.
We've got some really attractive premiums. This year with our contract, actually a lot more flexibility in pricing. Solo markets aren't that great, but by being able to do the omega-3 program, one, we've got those premiums, and two, they're going to be able to honestly market this crop for, if they've signed a contract today, almost 2 years, which is really nice. Out here in Montana and North Dakota, we are somewhat in the middle of nowhere. Our contract is a freight on board contract, so picked up on farm, which is really nice. Still have an active God with this contract, and these guys, they get to choose when they want to deliver as well. So some really positive pieces that when a grower is trying to decide, how can I make this work for my farm? The omega-3 program really thinks about how we can bring this specialty market to these growers.
That website is omega3canola.com. Great opportunity for growers in Montana and North Dakota.
Welcome back to RealAg Radio here on this Tuesday, October 1st. I am your host, Lyndsey Smith, and this is your reminder to join the Prairie Oak Growers Association for their annual general meeting on December 4th at the Fairmont Banff Springs Hotel. Visit poga.ca, that's POGA.ca, for more information and to register. All right, joining me now is Brenna Grant. She's the executive director with Canfax. Welcome here, Brenna.
Thank you, Lyndsey.
Let's talk about not the happiest story in the world, but an incredibly important one, and that is the state of the Canadian cow herd. What can we say about, let's say, the last 5 years as far as the size of the Canadian cow herd?
Well, we're down. And that's not surprising to anyone. We've had drought starting in 2021, and, moisture conditions have been the major challenge for beef producers. And so the July 1st numbers from StatsCan showed the beef cow herd down 2% from last year, and we're down about 8.5% from, the July 2017 previous peak of that last cycle. And things had been fairly stable from about 2017 to 2020, and then the drought hit, and we've seen most of that decline since then.
Mm-hmm. So what is the actual number as far as the estimate of how many cows Canada typically has on average, or what we think we have?
Like right now, we're at about 3.5 million head of beef cows. Our dairy herd is sitting here at around 970,000.
Okay.
And lots of us have sort of that 1 million dairy number in our heads. And it's just been slowly shrinking as they've seen productivity gains on the milk side. Lots of us will remember when we had a herd of 4 million head. And so we are definitely smaller than that sort of 4-to-1 ratio that we historically had, now looking at about 3.5-to-1.
Okay. And so just one of the key things I think that sometimes we don't talk as much about, and perhaps this is something that we'll see more of, is the dairy component is still a key part of our beef production, in that we still have a significant amount of beef that would come from the dairy sector.
Yeah, and so that's coming in multiple different ways. First of all, we've had a decline in the amount of veal production as demand for veal product has shrunk. And so that means that some of those animals are now being finished to full weights and coming into sort of our regular beef value chain. But we've also seen, this change to sexed semen in the dairy sector, which is allowing them to be a lot more precise in what animals they're actually breeding to get their replacement heifers out of. Right. And that allows them to actually then put beef semen on the rest of their cows so that they are a more efficient animal in the feedlot and more desirable by the feeding sector to finish.
Mm-hmm. So now the cow herd is one part of this, but of course replacement, so that heifer number plays a key role in that. Has the heifers on feed or that trend mirrored that of the cow trend as far as the grass is concerned, or has it actually had its own sort of trend up and down?
So we've definitely seen, and we continue to see, low heifer retention numbers, and even the July 1st numbers, which is always a soft number. And I'll caution everyone about that because lots can change in terms of crate checking heifers this fall and producers making final decisions based on winter feed that they have available. But it's one where even though we saw a bump with beef replacement heifers up just under 1% on July 1st, we're still well below historical relationships in terms of the percentage of those replacement heifers as a total of your beef cow herd. And that really indicates that even though it's up, we're probably looking more at a consolidation phase of the cattle cycle versus an expansion phase. We still need to see a lot more heifer retention before that happens.
So, and I guess that's one of my questions, is that, certainly from the, let's say, profitability side in the short term here, there's been some money to be made, certainly for the cow-calf producer, for the feeder sector as well. And this is, of course, tied to grass, right? And tied to feed. And exactly as you mentioned, what you've got for overwintering, what you're going to hold back. But how significant do we need that heifer retention number to be to actually signal that the cow herd is growing? I'm not going to ask if it ever gets there, but what would that actually look like if that were to be the case?
Before we talk about that heifer retention number, I actually want to talk about how do we go from liquidation to consolidation, because we've obviously been liquidating with the herd down up to the point of July 1st numbers. And that really has been due to the feed situation and drought, because the price signal has been there to keep animals if you have forage available. And so with the rain that we received in May, the first thing that happens is to slow down cow slaughter. You have to stop the bleeding, stop the liquidation. And that's what we've actually seen producers do. Cow slaughter is down 16% year to date. And since May, it's down 26% to be the lowest since 2020, which is when we were more at those stable consolidation levels. And that's sort of what we're looking at, is moving into a consolidation phase with improved moisture conditions here in Canada. And in the US, they also saw improved moisture in the spring, but they have some states that have moved back into more of a moisture deficit as we head into this fall. We've had some areas here in Canada where we've had some spotty rain in the last month, which is very welcome. Some of the US states haven't had that. And they're really looking at, can we just stay in consolidation to stop the liquidation on this moisture piece, and really expecting potentially consolidation to potentially be longer in this cattle cycle than we've seen in past cattle cycles. Historically, a 10-year cattle cycle would have about 3 years in consolidation, where you're sort of up or down 1% as producers recover from drought, as you get improved pasture conditions before they start expansion.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so it's going to take first a stabilization of the cow number before we really would ever even expect to see anything significant change in the heifer retention number. So does that put us out like 5 years from now before that's even a realistic expectation? That sounds like a really long time.
It does. So when you think of, 3 years as a typical consolidation phase, and, this coming sort of 12-month period being year one of that, you could sort of even think 3 years sounds like a long time.
Yeah.
But whether it is actually a long time or not really depends on three things. Producers need the profit signal to actually expand. They need the forage available and confidence that they have enough forage available, not just for this winter, but they actually have a comfortable stocks of forage available for the next drought. But also their future expectations of the market. And I think with some of the market volatility that we've experienced in the last year on the futures board, there's just a wee bit of hesitance as well of producers really wanting to see prices stabilized at these current levels in determining what they're going to do of how aggressive are they going to expand.
Mm-hmm. I think sometimes that it can be lost on, if you're not someone in the cattle industry, how long it takes to get a calf on the ground to market weight, right? So it really is a long cycle when you think about replacement of that cow in the herd or, a marketable animal for her. So imagine if I'm a cow-calf producer and I'm going to, sell stockers, that's a long time that I have to be thinking about what am I going to get for this calf, this fall, next spring. All of those, it is compared to, say, grain production or sheep or pigs, the idea of trying to plan out your profitability 18 months, 2 years in advance, that's a huge risk management problem to solve.
And not only is it the financial aspect of that, it's asking what's demand going to be 2 years out? Because a lot can change in those 2 years. And that's really what they're doing, is this long-term planning of looking at what the market demand is and saying the market really is asking for more beef on the market. And how are we going to provide that? Recognizing that we have a lot of flexibility in answering that question today with the genetics that we have in terms of feedlots being able to add more pounds at the feeding stage.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. All right. So 3 years. Let's say. So let's call this, or we will wait and see. I guess that's my next, or maybe final question is, how often does StatsCan sort of take that pulse on the cow herd? How often are we getting this number of sort of where we're at? Is that once a year, twice a year? How often would we see that? When would be the next sort of check-in of whether or not we're actually in this consolidation phase?
So we get it twice a year, July 1st and January 1st. So the January 1st numbers would become available usually early March. And that would be our next chance to sort of take a look at has the reduction in cow slaughter in the second half of this year actually allowed the herd to stabilize? Right. And have we actually seen some heifer retention, depending on what bred heifer sales happen this fall, but also will give us an idea after the fall calf run of how many of those heifer calves actually went through auction this fall and got placed.
Yep. Okay. Brenna, thank you so much. This is fascinating stuff. I appreciate the time, and we'll keep watching and we'll see.
You bet.
Start preparing for next year's emergence with fall tillage solutions from Vaterstad, including the Vaterstad Carrier high-speed disc, the top-down cultivator, Wilrich chisel plows, disc rippers, and heavy-duty Wishek discs. Vaterstad has equipment for all field conditions, soil types, and tillage practices. Find the right tool for your farm at vaterstad.com. All right, we'll be back with more RealAg Radio right after this.
Doing more in the field is possible when you add the proven power of Anvil Nitrogen Stabilizer, the next generation dual-active urease inhibitor from Koch Agronomic Services. Driven by Duramide technology, Anvil gives growers the advantages of low application rate and long-lasting protection, all thanks to Duramide, a Koch patented active ingredient. Defend against volatilization. Boost efficiency, accomplish more. Learn all about the dual active power of Anvil by visiting anvil.ca. That's ANVOL.ca.
There's a reason we call it the Corn School. Videos on everything from planter setup to weed control, field trial results, and the latest yield strategies. The Corn School on RealAgriculture.com has the information and advice you need to help you succeed. Brought to you by Pride Seeds and BASF. Corn School episodes are available at cornschool.com, from realagriculture.com, or as a podcast in your favorite podcast app. Check out the latest Corn School episode today.
Get ready for tillage season with the high-speed disc from Brandt. Cut and size residue, create ideal seed beds, and level ruts faster than any other tillage machine. It's a better field finish and fewer passes, so you can stay on schedule, no matter what fall throws at you. And right now, you can get yours with a $12,000 rebate. There's never been a better time to bring your operation up to speed. Visit Brandt.ca for details.
Welcome back to Real Ag Radio here on this Tuesday, October 1st. I am your host, Lyndsey Smith, and this segment is brought to you by Genesis Fertilizers. Nitrogen fertilizer is your farm's #1 expense. Farmers are working together through Genesis Fertilizers to solve the problem of high prices and security of supply by planning a state-of-the-art nitrogen plant. Security and earnings through ownership is the solution. Visit Genesis today at genesisfertilizers.com to learn more. Welcome back to Real Ag Radio and RealAgriculture.com. Joining me now is Ryan Kehrig. He's the National Leader, Agriculture Tax with MNP. Ryan, how are you?
I'm very good, thank you. How about yourself?
I'm doing well. And thank you for saying yes on this one. So this is kind of a fun conversation that we've been having at Real Ag. There's been some online discussion, and so I wanted to get some details on this. So as background for everybody listening, we posed the question a few weeks ago. If it's time for a new build, a new house on the farm for perhaps an incoming generation, is it better to build on the farm or in town? And so Ryan, at first glance, what do we have to think about?
Well, it's not going to be the same answer for everyone. I can tell you that right now. There's a lot of soft skills that would need to go in that. But like where I would really focus for my expertise and my background is the financial ramifications of one way or the other. And what may make sense for your operation here. Like I can come at it from the tax perspectives and what you need to think about, but ultimately it's a bigger family discussion on where that next house should be.
Mm-hmm. So, and that was one of the things I brought up is, and we're not going to tackle it in this conversation, probably another one that, first of all, who is building this house? Is it, mom and dad? Is it the incoming generation? That sort of stuff. So again, that's where those discussions would come in. But if we are thinking about, the tax implication, the financial implications of a new residence added to the farm, is there an advantage one way or the other of where that house gets built?
I would say it's probably neutral, but like if you step back and you think about it, most often when a new house is being built, the funds need to come out of the farming operation to finance that house, unless you're going to get traditional mortgages involved and so forth like that. So if you're stepping back thinking about it, well, quite a few of the farm operations, I'd say the majority are probably operating in a corporate structure right now, and they have access to lots of corporate dollars. So assuming that house is going to be built on the farm, the natural question comes to be as well, hey, if I use corporate dollars, should I purchase that house should I build that house inside my farming company, or should I still own it on the farm, but in my personal capacity? And it's really going to depend. I'll walk you through an example here. If a house is going to be built and owned inside the farming company here, that's really a corporate owned asset. You don't own it in your own individual names. So that can come into a lot of issues with subdivision and so forth like that. But ignoring the legal subdivision and other considerations part of it, I'm going to focus on the tax implications of it here. Really, you have a corporate owned asset. It is being used in the farming business, and I'll get back to that in a second here, but you are allowed to take depreciation on that house. It is a very low rate, but it can be depreciated like other assets that are owned. Now, that being said, people might be like, well, it's great to have a deduction inside my company. I'm all for that. There are other considerations to look at, because The individuals that are living there, quite often they're going to be the mom and dad in the structure or the next generation. They're going to be involved in the farm as employees. Okay, so think about it. You're using a corporate-owned house in your personal capacity. Naturally, you're going to have to charge fair market value rent. The company is going to charge the people living there fair value rent. So you're going to have corporate income that needs to be figured in. And one of the big things to figure out there is what is fair market value rent. I'm not going to dive into that, but there is a lot of considerations that need to go into that, and honest discussions need to be had. So you'll have corporate income. Then you also have to realize that you're going to have personal income on it as well, unless the individuals are actually stroking checks to the farming company, which quite often doesn't happen. It's just kept track of. And at the end of the year, they're going to have a taxable benefit that they have to pay on their personal tax returns. So it's probably almost a wash in some circumstances. Not all are going to be the same, but it's not a slam dunk answer one way or the other in that regard.
Now, you mentioned, so if it is an asset of the farm, and so it is okay, though, that the corporation build this house and that members who own the corporation live in this house. That is okay. It is
okay. When I say members that own the corporation, though, the CRA has been pretty clear that they have to be employees of the corporation. So, typically that is not just shareholders. So it may require some rethinking of how the individuals are paid by the farm. If they've traditionally taken dividends, that might need to look at shifting to a wage strategy and so forth like that. But an important consideration to think about in that is circumstances change. You may be an employee of the company for 20, 30 years, but what happens if you step back or are no longer involved? All of a sudden you have that house in there and it's maybe not quite the same facts that it originally was.
Mm-hmm. And now where does capital gains come into all this?
Great question. So one of the things you're losing by having it inside of a corporation is you don't have access to the principal residence exemption, because that's only available for individuals. Now, there may be other properties in the equation. Perhaps there's a cabin somewhere or anything that needs to be factored in. But given the rampant price, just appreciation we've seen in houses over the last 10, 15, 20 years, that is something to be considered. But a counter argument I'll say to that sometimes is that could that house ever be separated from the farm? And that's going to totally depend how your yard is laid out. Is the yard half a mile down the road from the main yard, or all those type of things that need to be factored in? We will sometimes see this in dairy structures, for example. It's very hard to separate a dairy house out from the operations. And if that dairy ever was to sell, the house is going to go with it, lock, stock, and barrel, just by the nature of it. So once again, it kind of depends on a lot of circumstances. But you touch on something interesting there, Lyndsey, with the capital gain. I'll take it one step further and talk about the lifetime capital gain exemption. Yeah. If that house is inside of a farming company, it's considered to be an asset of the farming company. So I've talked about this in other segments before, but in order for shares to be transferred or roll over to the next generation, or if the assets were ever to be sold and use your lifetime capital gain exemption, 90% of the fair market value of the assets inside the company need to actively be used in a farming operation. So that house, provided the right circumstances are met, would be considered to be a good asset, but that could change year to year or as the farm progresses through its life cycle. So it's just something to consider and be on top of. So once again, I hate to use this as a crutch, but it's kind of, it depends on where you at type in your farm planning.
Right. So, but it's a good point that you bring out. Let's say it's a 10-year, 15-year timeline, that perhaps the situation when the house was built and the people that moved into it at the time were employed by the corporation and everything worked. But if that situation were to change, that structure may need to be looked at because it may not meet that threshold.
Absolutely. Things are always changing. And also another good question or consideration would be, if the farm ever was to be sold, would the expectation be that you would keep the house as part of that as well? Or is it all going to be lock, stock, and barrel again? So it's not a slam dunk one way or the other, I guess is what I'm trying to highlight here.
Yeah. And I guess my last question on that one is thinking about, let's say that this is because we've got multi-generations in a farm corporation farming together. This is a second, maybe even a third residence, who knows? Let's take a step back from someone who perhaps is the non-farming partner, let's say, that's coming into that situation. What would they have to consider? So let's say you're a spouse that's moving into this house with your spouse who is part of the corporation. What protections are there, or what considerations would there be for a spouse who's perhaps not part of the farm as far as protecting their own asset base? Is that all dealt in a prenup? How do you deal with that?
Well, that's a tough one, Lyndsey. I'm not sure I would know how to answer that one.
And it's a big one. Yeah.
It is a big one. I would be leery of myself commenting on the legal relationships and so forth. I do know that in certain provinces, Saskatchewan being one, there is the Homesteader Act as well, and that offers certain protections, but I think I'd be out of my realm talking about that here.
So this is, for anyone listening, this is where, and frankly, even within this discussion, without adding that on, go talk to your farm financial advisor about all of this. This is the whole point of this discussion, is to exactly that, bring up those areas where maybe you haven't thought about that yet. So yes.
Absolutely. Like I'm coming at it solely from the tax perspective and getting the funds out. You would want to have some discussions with your lawyer and also figure out some of the softer family dynamic skills, because it wouldn't be the first time that maybe we've seen circumstances where there becomes some differences in philosophies on a farming situation, and then all of a sudden you have the softer skills that need to be dealt with. So
yeah, absolutely. No, it is complicated, but that doesn't mean it's insurmountable. We can figure this all out. So yes. Okay, Ryan, thank you so much for your time and your insight into this one. For anyone who's looking for more from MMP, where can they go?
Well, we have offices located all over the country, so if you probably look, there's one not too far from you. But if not, you could probably reach out to myself, and that could be figured out through a quick online search. So,
all right. Okay, we'll connect you if need be. All right, Ryan, have a great day. Thanks so much for joining me on the show. Remember to protect your anhydrous ammonia and bottom line, even if temperatures hit 15 degrees or below, with Centuro Nitrogen Stabilizer. That's right, it's not too late to apply agronomically effective, non-corrosive Centuro Nitrogen Stabilizer. Learn more at centuro.ca. We are going to take a quick break here on Rural Radio Channel 147, and we'll be back with more RealAg Radio right after this. If you have a growing list of questions about getting more from your fields, know that Koch Agronomic Services has an answer for every acre. With a full spectrum of nutrient management, nutrient protection, and seed enhancement options, Koch Agronomic Services offers a deep portfolio of agronomically effective products. Each designed to enhance yield potential, all available to help solve your problems. Find the answer that's right for your acres. Start by visiting kochag.ca. That's Koch ag.ca.
What were the issues in your fields this year? Did you do a soil sample? What is your soil sample telling you about some of the nutrient issues that you might be having going into next year? What herbicides did you use? What residues you might be concerned about? What weed issues did you have? What crop residues did you have? How well do you know your fields?
Get the answers to all the questions you have about your pulse crop at the Pulse School on RealAgriculture.com. Welcome back to RealAg Radio here on Rural Radio Channel 147, Sirius XM. And the answer to your above-ground nitrogen loss problem is Anvol Nitrogen Stabilizer from Koch Agronomic Services. To learn how Anvol's dual-active ingredients deliver extended protection, visit kochag.ca. I'm Lyndsey Smith with Real Agriculture and RealAg Radio, and joining me now is Dr. Leigh Rosengren. She's the Chief Veterinary Officer with the Canadian Cattle Association. Welcome here, Leigh.
Thank you, Lyndsey. Pleasure to be here.
All right. So in digging into, we have a bill right now in the House of Commons, Bill C-293. And broadly speaking, this is Canada's pandemic response or future pandemic response, but held within the bill are significant points that could have an impact on Canada's livestock industries, specifically when it comes to the use potentially of antimicrobials. I want to start, let's just back up one step. People are pretty familiar with antibiotics. What is antimicrobials? What does that actually mean?
Well, in general lingo, they are interchangeable terms. Antimicrobials are any drug that we use to kill microbes. And really, when we're talking about the concern about antibiotic resistance, we're talking about bacteria that have become resistant to the antibiotics that are typically used to treat or prevent an infection.
Okay. So in this bill, there is language that talks about our livestock systems having potentially an impact on a pandemic response or perhaps a pandemic happening. I want to explore from the perspective of the science, from the perspective of what the cattle industry has already been taking on as far as managing and avoiding antimicrobial resistance. Is this science-based where this bill is sort of trying to take us? Is that, does all of this add up as far as how the language portrays it?
Well, I think you've really hit the nail on the head. This is a wide-ranging bill, and it's a bill that we're just not clear on what direction it's going to go, and there is some concerning language. I heard it explained to me early in my career that if you think you understand antimicrobial resistance, you haven't had it explained to you properly. This is an incredibly complex scientific topic. First of all, we need listeners to be clear that all antimicrobial use selects for resistance. That's natural biological selection. But we still need to use antimicrobials both in human medicine and in veterinary medicine to protect the health and welfare of animals. So it's the nuances that are concerning, not necessarily the overall connection between agriculture and antimicrobial resistance.
Mm-hmm. So, and that's one thing. I'm a livestock producer as well. We've had recent rule changes over the past little while within, how livestock producers access antimicrobials, the importance of having a vet-client relationship. What is the industry already doing in this space of antimicrobial resistance?
Well, I think we need to look at the industry specifically, but we also need to look in Canada in the global context. So you're right. We had regulatory changes back in 2018 that moved all medically important antimicrobials to prescription only. That was an incredibly important step for Canada to take to ensure that when antibiotics are used in livestock, they're used judiciously and under good stewardship. So at this point, as you know, every cattle producer in Canada has a veterinary client-patient relationship, and the antibiotics or antimicrobials that they're using are done so under veterinary prescription. That's for all livestock species. The other thing we need to think about Canada in terms of that global context, at the same time, they took the step to formalize that medically important antimicrobials were no longer used for growth promotion purposes. And we hadn't been doing that for decades in our country, but it was now formalized on the labels. That's really important. Not all countries globally have done that. So consumers can rest assured that that's where the industry's at. So those are some of the things we're doing. The other thing we do, Lyndsey, is we lean into cattle health and wellness. And so we tend to think about minimizing antimicrobial use, but the phrase that I really like to use is as little as possible, but as much as necessary. And so where we really lean in is making sure it's as little as possible, doing proper vaccination programs, using proper biosecurity, using proper systems to keep our cattle healthy so that we can minimize the amount of use that we need. I think those are really important pieces to get out there when we're talking about antimicrobial use, which then, of course, is tied to the issue of resistance.
Mm-hmm. Now, this bill as written, it does have sort of very specific language as to, promoting plant-based protein, mm-hmm. etc. What, in your mind, from how we manage these things, how important is it that we have scientific language that, of course, leaves it open to be able to manage our livestock sectors should the government feel they need to, but is really in line with what is necessary to keep our livestock healthy?
Right. So again, going back to how we use antimicrobials, I talked about that. But one of the other things Canadians might not be aware of is the existence that we have surveillance in Canada that follows both farm gate antimicrobial use, but resistance in bacteria that are potentially foodborne right from the farm through the slaughter process, through retail, and then is actually linked to FoodNet, which is humans. So consumers can be assured that this is being monitored by the Public Health Agency of Canada, which then provides us that scientific evidence to build our programs and policies on. It's a space that both the government and the industry have been very proactive in. I don't want to make it sound like we're reacting to bills like this. We've been doing this for decades.
And to that point, this bill, of course, is not brand new, and certainly there have been submissions from several of the industry groups who have been following this closely and have been a part of this process, even as it moves through Parliament. So certainly, it's true. It's not that this is, a surprise per se, but certainly I think many industry groups are speaking out against the language as it is, as it moves its way through Parliament. From CCA's perspective, what would you like to see in a bill that is, yes, it's very broad, but from the animal health perspective, what would you prefer to see in a bill such as this?
I think what we absolutely need to recognize is that the threat of antimicrobial resistance is real. It is a real public health threat, but it needs to be addressed through a One Health lens. We need to recognize that the problems and the solutions both lie in that triad of considering the environment, agriculture, and humans, and that we cannot properly solve this by trying to address one sector alone. It has to be through that One Health lens, and it has to be science-based, to go back to my first point, because it is so very complex.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. All right, Dr. Rosengren, thank you so much for joining me on the show today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Lyndsey. Appreciate your time.
All right, I'm sure this is one of those bills that many of you will want to comment on. You can, of course, send us your thoughts, 1-855-776-6147, or you can zip me an email, lsmith@realagriculture.com. I just want to, for anyone who wants to read up on it, Bill 293 is at third reading. And was at the beginning of June. So this is making its way through the House of Parliament. I just want to point out the exact wording, okay? After consultation with the Minister of Agriculture and Agri-Food, the Ministry of Industry and provincial governments provide measures to, so this is what the Act says the government must do, reduce the risk posed by antimicrobial resistance, fine, regulate commercial activities that can contribute to pandemic risk, including industrial animal agriculture, promote commercial activities that can help reduce the risk, including the production of alternative proteins, and phase out commercial activities that disproportionately contribute to pandemic risk, including activities that involve high-risk species. So that is the exact wording as written in the bill, and that gives you some context as to why, and as you look, we have several of our producer industry groups or our livestock industry groups really taking issue with how prescriptive this legislation is. And it's really direct and sort of actually hamstrings the government in what it would be required to do. And that is, of course, a big issue for many of us in livestock production, in that this isn't necessarily allowing for the science-based research and protocols that are already in place. All right, so check that out. We'll have more coverage, of course, at realagriculture.com. In the meantime, we're going to hop to a break, and I've got some listener feedback and the top news right after this.
Advanced canola trait technology is here. And it's soon to be the talk of the town. Optimum Glide delivers excellent yield potential and agronomic trait performance. Improved crop safety. Enhanced weed control. And a wider window of application. You're going to want to see this. Learn more at OptimumGlide.ca.
Peter Johnson at WheatPete, RealAgriculture.com. I'm the host of The Word, and I love doing The Word. I love the questions. I love the challenges. I love having to apply agronomics to all over the globe and areas outside of my normal jurisdiction. Also, I love the feedback the most, where growers challenge me, tell me about their plot results, help me to learn. The Word, absolutely the best part of my day.
Welcome back to Real Ag Radio here on Rural Radio Channel 147, Sirius XM. I am your host, Lyndsey Smith, and the best answer for agronomically effective dual nitrogen protection, why that's Super U Premium Fertilizer from Koch Agronomic Services. To learn how this ready-to-use granular fertilizer protects nitrogen and boosts efficiency, visit kochag.ca. All right. As promised, we've got some news stories, but before we get to that, we're going to reach in, if you will, to the old mailbag. Yes. Remember when mailbags were a thing? Yeah, me neither. Anyway, great to hear from so many of you. We really appreciate it. You know, when we get on the issues panel on a Friday, there's opinions flying around. There's stories that we're covering. Some of them you probably care very deeply about. Others maybe you don't at all. But we definitely got some great feedback over the past few weeks. One of the stories that certainly we figured would get some people to respond, and certainly did, was the discussion of the Economist story on if big vehicles, heavy vehicles, so pickup trucks, but others as well, were essentially more dangerous on the roads. And statistically speaking, that's what the story was about, was that America's roads are some of the deadliest, and they're pointing the finger at heavier vehicles. Now, we know that a heavier vehicle doesn't necessarily mean just a pickup truck or an SUV, but when we go up against, say, something like Europe, where a lot of the vehicles are quite small, maybe the roadway speeds are a lot slower, America's roads are deadlier. So we did get some feedback on this particular story. And so we did have a caller that said, well, the data is the data. And you're right, numbers are numbers. This caller said, I rather think that it's the cause, that we're not talking about the root cause. This is just a symptom. The root cause is the fact that drivers are getting worse and worse overall. Right now in southwestern Ontario, we're taking off the processing tomato crop, and I've spent my days delivering them to the tomato capital of Canada, that's Leamington, Ontario, and had many, many close calls. Our drivers need to be better educated, better trained, and although many people will disagree that more training up front should be provided or required, I should say that I think that's something we really need to look at, not just in big cities. Now, this, of course, to that listener, I completely agree that especially right now in the harvest season, when we have large equipment, or in the seeding planting season, when we have large equipment on the roads, I personally know of several people who have had either close calls or minor injuries or minor accidents with other vehicles. And you're absolutely right. We have very busy roads. We do, I think, need far more awareness than we have. And frankly, we probably could do with some more training for new drivers or existing drivers about raising some awareness about the safety issues. We know that large vehicles, whether they be combines, tractors hauling, grain buggies, whatever the case may be, we can't stop on a dime. And while cars have amazing safety features, when a vehicle like a tractor and a car collide, it's usually the car that ends up very damaged. But if the driver of said tractor is not wearing a seatbelt, we don't have the same kind of protections within the tractor cab that we have in vehicles. And ultimately, the final result is just bad all around. So absolutely, we know that road safety is a huge issue, and I encourage everybody to take their time and make sure that you're watching out for those other vehicles as well. Unfortunately, as the bigger piece of equipment on the road, it's just within what we have to be doing. Even though we're maybe not at fault, we still have to be watching what everybody else is doing. So absolutely. We also had some good feedback. Of course, if you head over to YouTube, our YouTube channel, we have a couple series on there that maybe you don't hear much about on RealAg Radio. We don't always play clips from them or those sorts of things, but head on over to YouTube, search Real Agriculture. You'll find our whole channel. We've had it there, for as long as there's been Real Ag. So it's actually been probably 15 years, that Real Ag has been around. And, there's some really great videos. And most recently, we've put up our latest in our shop series. So this is a series brought to you by Princess Auto, where shop owners take us on a tour of their shop. We've done ones in Alberta and Manitoba, Ontario, and we're going to be doing a whole bunch more as well. So take a look. We got some great feedback on the latest one. And usually if people start watching one, they go and they want to see the rest of them, and definitely been some great comments. One of the comments that we get on the shop series, and it's definitely something we'll work in going forward, is people want to see how, like if you've got a parts or service truck that you've made for your own equipment, how you organize it. So people seem to be very fascinated, and I think for very good reason, of how parts are dealt with or inventoried, how the tools are stored and kept handy, but but also how when you have a vehicle that's going to head out to the field, if you've got some great ways that you've organized that or some key ways that you've made it really handy, we'd love to hear from that or hear from you. You can email shaney@realagriculture.com if you either have a shop you'd love to invite us to, or if you figured out a cool way to set up a service truck, we'd love to see that as well. So let us know on that one. Okay, so yes, on YouTube, lots of feedback there as well. Really appreciate it. I have one last comment that actually I received a little while ago, and as always, so this is one thing, everyone. If you want to remain anonymous, you can. We have no problem when you're going to send your feedback. If you're a little camera shy or you don't necessarily want everybody knowing who you are, we don't mind, but we still love getting your feedback, your thoughts on the things we cover. I had one person who reached out who really wants to talk about the fact that we have rather abysmal adoption rates of new technology at times within our sector. And we talked about this a little while ago about the barriers to innovation, the barriers to adoption, and that really it is within our best interest as an industry to be adopting change, but it can be hard. And so this person said that farmers have the perfect tool to demonstrate to the vigilant consumers that they are employing the most modern means of reducing and eliminating wasteful and potentially harmful practices as they produce their food products. Our farmers are at risk of being revealed that they are not doing this when they employ old traditional crop input practices of flat rate applications, or worse yet, not doing any soil testing whatsoever and totally guessing when they apply. We need to figure out and overcome the reasons for slow adoption. So would love to hear your thoughts on that one as well. If you are a person who feels, you know you should be soil testing, but you don't, what holds you back? That's just one tiny example, but there are many of them that realistically, even when the science is there, sometimes it's really hard to change practices and adopt. And I didn't use a clip of last night's agronomist, but this actually came up in the discussion on ultra early seeding. So this is for wheat. This is in the Canadian prairies. This is going in when the soil temperature, the trigger, is above 0 degrees Celsius. If the soil is warm enough and is fit for seeding or planting, you go, no matter what the calendar says. Dr. Brian Barris has been doing this research. He's been doing this research for years. He has reams of data, and he has planted wheat in southern Alberta as early as February 9th. And yes, it made a crop, and in fact has worked out incredibly well. And he is one person that will tell you that he still is surprised at how little this practice of ultra early seeding in the years where it makes sense to do it, that it just has not caught on, even though the research is there. So that, again, sort of speaks to the holdup to adoption. So there you go. Okay, I am running out of time. I said there would be news. I don't have a lot of time for news, but we will recap a few things. So we do have an ongoing strike at the Port of Montreal that we did see, of course, over the weekend. We did see that the Port of Vancouver strike did end. Of course, good news all around. It was about a 4-day strike. But now, of course, we've got issues at the Port of Montreal. This is a little bit of a different format. It's not the entire, it's not everyone at the port that's going on strike. They are going on sort of what they're calling a rolling strike. So certain days, certain departments or certain employees are going to go on strike. But we've also got strikes happening down in the U.S. for the first time in a very long time. And this time, what's interesting about the strike in the U.S., so the United States Maritime Alliance is facing 47,000 dock workers going on strike. Now, one of the things at issue, yes, is pay. And we see that quite often when it comes to these labor actions, that often it is settling a contract and asking for more pay or more benefits. But one of the key issues, and this goes back to just that conversation we had about technology adoption, one of the key issues is actually about automation. And the dock workers union is fighting the fact that they are concerned that more automation is going to essentially over time eliminate jobs. I think most of us would agree that if automation adds efficiency and saves labor and saves time, we're all for it. But in the meantime, a huge amount of people, 47,000 people on strike, that's a huge amount of jobs that are potentially at risk if automation is adopted. And you can certainly see why they'd be concerned. So if you've got feedback on today's show, 1-855-776-6147, or you can zip me an email, lsmith@realagriculture.com. I will talk to you on the Issues panel on Friday. Cheers, everybody. We'll talk then.
Thank you for downloading this episode, brought to you by Brett Young. Check out their new BY7204LL canola with Pod Defender shatter tolerance and Defender rated club root protection. Talk to your local retailer today.